Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Woodland Walk for September, which is the Hazel Tree and our month of gratitude. And I am hugely grateful to our guest for this month, which is Akua Ofosuhene. I hope I'm saying your name right, Akua.
You did. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And it's a real joy to have Akua back. Akua's been with us for a Woodland Walk a few years ago now. Akua, thank you for being with us. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
we're going to hear so
Thank
much
you
more
for
about you.
asking.
Oh, and we're going to hear so much about you, more about you than the story of what brought you to the world of psychedelics. We're going to hear about the work, amazing work you're doing now, because Akua is a medicine facilitator in Ghana. But Akua's story starts years ago. And so would you share with us and just everyone sit back, have a cup of tea, like get your cup of tea and listen to this story as in a world where we so often there are so many struggles and things that feel insurmountable and things that feel like they are impossible to change and hopelessness can feel like it's kind of like catching sometimes. This is a story of the opposite. So yeah, take a moment, really listen to this beautiful, beautiful account of an incredible kind of contribution from psychedelics and from a queer to something that is so important in our world on every level.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's so funny actually because the more I think about our story, it always feels like, gosh, it started even further back, but only because, all of our lives are so linked in all these things. But basically, I suppose say that I'd always, from when I knew I was pregnant with a boy, I had made a decision to that he should grow up in Ghana rather than the UK. I just knew I could afford so much more for him, and he definitely wouldn't have to deal with racism. I mean, he's mixed race, so he would still have to deal with something, but it just wouldn't be of the same quality as back in the UK. And things went well when we were able to move to Ghana with some difficulty because his father died the same year as our moving, but we moved anyway because it was all planned. And we were there for 5 months and for 5 years, sorry. And my mum became ill, and I decided that I could afford to come back for 3 months to help look after her. My son would have time off school, but we felt like we could manage it, and his school in Ghana were fine about it. And we came back to look after her, but unfortunately, her operation went wrong, and we didn't know how much mobility she was going to end up having. So it seemed easier in a way to stay and help look after my mum and just play it by ear. Unfortunately, I think for me, really, that whole thing of suddenly going from a business owner, I had two shops in Ghana. We definitely lived more of a middle class life in Ghana than back to England in a council house, really nice area of St. John's Wood. But in terms of schools, I had to put my son in the local comprehensive, which was an academy school. And I still had high hopes because it was linked with UCL. So I thought, oh, okay, he can still end up going to a really good university. But I found it really difficult, that transition into being a carer. And I definitely fell into quite a depression. I didn't feel supported by other family members. And suddenly trying to even make a living seemed to be, I had to try and do everything around caring for my mum. And I would say I dropped the ball with my son. I just thought he'd been such a bright kid, always been a bright kid. I just assumed that he would carry on being a bright kid because he was moved up a year in English. He seemed to be doing well. Um, and I didn't notice anything wrong until literally the day the police knocked on our door to say that my son had been caught with a knife. And I was really, I was so shocked at that. I don't think I laughed, but I think I wanted to laugh because it was all so shocking. Um, but it just started. I suppose everything that I've been squashing down came to the fore, just how much I wasn't coping with the new reality came up, how much I wasn't really keeping an eye on my son came up. You know, everything imploded for us. And I just kind of remember going to the doctors and realizing that I didn't want to take antidepressants because I also didn't feel like I was that bad. I knew things were bad, but I didn't want to do that. And I also realized that therapy, classical therapy, was also too slow for what was happening. Everything seemed to be happening very fast. Got my son into therapy. And then I just started Googling things fast, how to get over procrastination fast, how to change your mind fast, how to help your children fast. Everything was fast, fast, fast. And so it did lead to psychedelics. But for a long time, I just didn't have the networks anymore. I'd experimented with MDMA, even had cocaine when I was much, much younger. But I'm one of those people who, as soon as I became pregnant, you know, the past was the past, and you become the parent that you want to be. And that certainly didn't include recreational drugs. So I just didn't have the networks. And also reading about psychedelics, I realized that when we were younger and we came across acid and MDMA, we had no idea of the therapeutic aspects of them. So yeah, all of that was really difficult. But it forced me to learn other modalities, nonviolent communication, emotional freedom technique, self-inquiry, the Byron Katie method. And I also came across Cambo, which is absolutely brilliant and a great prelude to finally getting to Iboga, which took absolutely ages to find somebody serving Iboga. I'd chosen Iboga over Ayahuasca because I thought, being African, I'd find it easier to get hold of, but it wasn't true at all. It's not something that most West Africans have heard about. Outside of Gabon, it's still something that's, you know, very, very little known about. But I always say, once I had the Iboga, I feel like it gave me a new spine. It just gave me this rod, and I was able to start thinking. I was able to get over the shame. I realized that the shame was definitely what had kept me so stuck. And we're dealing with, and we're still, you know, dealing with the police, dealing with social workers, dealing with youth workers, dealing with the school. It just forced me to become real about all these different things and all these different relationships, and yeah, deal with my own thoughts about the police, social workers, you know, and find strategies. And that was, I think, the thing that the psychedelics really did help me to do, was just find strategies and really understand how much of the idea that any change you want to see in the world begins with you. It brought all of that so much more home, because I was the one who had to deal with all of these people. You know, I could, I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but I could have taken it to the medicine, please make the police be nice to me. But I I would just always, it, you know, it was me going through all of this, and it just helped me find a way to work with the medicines that made real changes in real life. Um, like one of the things I talk about a lot was, one day after taking mushrooms, I realized that they would have these case conferences once a month, and there would be me and 10 to 12 different professionals in this room. And I was constantly trying to get the three people who really had no interest in me. I was always trying to get them to listen. And I just remember, after one really powerful mushroom trip, just realizing that actually there were 7 other people who really wanted to help me. And I just stopped speaking at those people and started communicating with the ones who wanted to help me. And I've got to say, those policemen and women and social workers were brilliant. They started telling me things that you're not supposed to tell parents of children who are out there dealing drugs and all this stuff. And I just found every time I would take a practical, real world problem to the medicine, I was given the courage and the wisdom to go back into the world and get, solid help from people and solid help from myself to, to start to transmute the whole situation.
Mm. And transmute the situation you did. So it was a
Mm,
long process for you. But can you
yes,
say a little
yeah.
bit more about how through this practice of going in and working deeply within yourself was able
Mm,
to have
mm.
this life-changing impact on your son?
Mm-hmm. I think so. Quite soon after the Iboga, I realized I couldn't go back to the Iboga practitioner because it was so much money. So then I started working with magic mushrooms, and I realized from watching all these videos, watching all these talks, and I always say it was so amazing to meet you in real life because I'd met you on YouTube, you know, years before and listened to you talking and just kind of, yeah, everything any scientist said about the medicines, any psychologist, any psychiatrist talked about psychedelics that I listened to, I would make notes, I would try and see how I could use them practically. So I started developing a real practice of having really solid intentions. And they would always be, after a while, I got to, instead of asking why, my mum used to say, don't ask why has a long tail. And so I stayed away from why and I started asking for what I didn't want to have anymore and what I wanted to bring in. And I found those kinds of intentions helped me to be able to really understand what the medicine was showing me. Whereas at times when I would go in without an intention, I would still receive healing, but it would take me longer to even interpret the healing because I didn't go in with a question, so I didn't really understand what I was seeing. And then when it came to integration, I would always write down my trips and I would write down all the lessons, but I'd forget them over time. So after a while, I started to write down the lessons and what I now needed to do and stick it on the wall. And I found that it was saving me money because when I did um, what I needed to do, that would open doors to more healing without me going back into the medicine.
Mm.
Whereas before, where I was like, do integration and forget about it, I'd take something back to the medicine, look back over old trips and realize I'd received the answer about 3 trips ago. So I just kind of was developing stuff that would make my progress with the medicines faster, but also deeper and cost me less money. And that was basically the thing. And I learned also that I could ask real things that I really, really wanted. Like, I would like my son not to be arrested anymore. I would like my son to come home because we're talking about like a 3-year period. It wasn't like as soon as I had the Iboga, then I had all of the wisdom to bring him back. I was just constantly learning more things about myself, about him, about the situations that led him to being able to be groomed, about yeah, just my whole relationship with the world and with him, how much of my parenting had been from fear anyway, which was something that he'd picked up on and was able, while he was going through this whole drug dealing thing, to also tell me, and learning how to listen and hear him and not kind of keep telling him why. He was very hurt by the fact that we moved to Ghana 3 months after his father died. And before, every time he would say it, I would start with, but we were moving anyway. We were, all of our stuff was on a ship going to Ghana when he died. I kept on trying to get him to see my point. And the medicines just helped me to just really hear what that was like for an 8-year-old to lose his father and then lose his home and lose the rest of his family and move to another country. It's all very well for me going, the education system's better and you got a taxi that took you to school. That's not the point. He suffered real compounded grief. And the psychedelics were just really, they made me able to hear him and empathize with him and build new relationships, new aspects to our relationships that definitely had fallen off, with each one of these different things. And then, as well as him being bullied in school and that whole being pulled into a gang, which is actually more like a cult than a family. I think there are probably some gang situations where it's more like being pulled into a family, but definitely the situation my son was involved in was a lot more like being pulled into a cult, where he was having to re-indoctrinate himself, separate himself off from us. And the medicines were just really good at helping me to find whatever little threads might still be there to grab onto that relationship and try and reel him in a bit, and also reel myself in to him a lot more by getting softer, moving away from the idea of boundaries, because there was no more boundaries by, all of those ways of parenting are completely not relevant at that level. So yeah, the medicines were just so good. And then I was able to start an African spiritual practice around that time as well, started doing altar work and putting out water for the ancestors, praying at the crossroads to the deity, voodoo deity called Papa Elegba, who's like the road opener. So he's like Ganesha. So I would go put coins at the crossroads, pour libation. And for a while, my only intention with the medicine, but also with my African spirituality, was I want him brought home, not arrested, with money or drugs on him. And we were very lucky. We had a period of time where, and I would tell him as well, I told him everything I was doing. He knew about the psychedelics, he knew about the Cambo, he knew about the tapping. I tried tapping on him, he didn't like it. Everything I was doing, I was always telling him. But yeah, he was arrested 5 times in a row, but each time it was after he'd given over the money or given over the drugs. So although he was arrested because the police they know about these young kids who are transported over county lines, and there was a file on him. But so each time he would be brought back to London, and although I'd fought tooth and nail to have him under this thing that says that you have parents who are not in the drugs trade, so he should have been brought back to my house. He actually was never ever brought back to my house. He was always dropped off outside the dealers' houses that he wanted to go to. But I think for them, they're also ticking their boxes. They're trying to not do prosecutions that's going to cost them loads of money, and they're fed up with kids coming in from other counties, so there's all these different things going on. But I was just always relying on the medicines and I suppose my newly found African spiritual practices to protect me and my son. And then after a couple of years, I started sharing some of the scientific data with him, some of the talks that I was listening to, and I just share it with him because he'd started to notice changes in me from using iboga and using mushrooms. And then eventually what happened was when I felt like we'd really come together, then I said to him, if you come home and take some medicine, I promise that you will either be the best drug dealer there's ever been, or you will stop. But either one, I'll support you and I will stop kind of nagging. And luckily, a couple of days later, one of the runners for the kind of place they were using got caught by the police. So they had to come back to London early. But I was already prepared with my substances. And I went in with just under, I think it was about half a gram of MDMA first. And that was spectacular because within half an hour, 45 minutes, he told me exactly how he was groomed, how he didn't really want to do it, how he didn't feel like there was any way of getting out of it. And what he wanted to do was to make it work so that he felt like making it work was a way of coming out of it. You know, it was now it's my choice. And then he felt he now had the courage to leave. So he told us where the drugs were. And the next day we gave it back to the people. And then that night I gave him 5 grams of magic mushrooms. And he just cried for like the whole night. He just cried and cried and cried and cried. And it felt like a lot of grief. And for us at that point, then the story was finished. But then there was the next stage, which is then dealing with what it's like to be groomed and not make your own decisions, and the shame you brought on your family and the depression, because he'd definitely been suffering from PTSD during that time of being in the group. So thank goodness, quite soon after him coming out, lockdown came in. So that at least stopped him going out. And we were able to work quite intensely every 2 or 3 months with the mushrooms, with the mushrooms, with the mushrooms. And eventually he chose to go to Ghana. Then he went back to school. But it was still the struggle with his own psychology. And he's kind of like, he's banned me from talking about his life after that bit. So I can't say much more, only that I'm really happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's not gone back. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pleased.
Well, and
Yeah.
thanks to him for allowing you to share that story, because
Mm.
and thanks to you for not just sharing it, but for doing it, because it's such a, I think so often, like in the psychedelics world, like there's that kind of slight cliche around people that are doing a lot of psychedelics, and the people around them are kind of saying like, I'm not sure about these psychedelics because this person
Yeah.
keeps going to healing ceremonies, and actually I'm not sure if they're becoming more of a easy person to be with, or actually maybe they're getting slightly worse, like that's that's a thing. And
Mm, mm,
and obviously that's when people aren't integrating properly, and it's a very, very different approach to it. But the approach
mm,
you had with that kind of just educating yourself, the intentionality, the dedication, that sense of like, right, okay, I've got to do this, I'm going to do it
mm,
properly, like complete mother's love driving you
mm,
forward. And the thing that I love most about the story is that he noticed that there was a change in you that meant that
mm,
he
mm.
was curious. And that
Yes.
is just, I think that's just everything, isn't it? It's like
Mm,
how,
mm, mm,
and I don't know, like that must have taken so much dedication from you to keep going, even though you didn't
mm,
know that there was going to be the outcome, that it was going to actually save your son and bring him back from
mm,
that
mm, mm,
place.
mm,
You kept
mm.
going, even though I suppose with the intention that you wanted to just work on yourself so you could support him the best way you can, even if, or did you feel that did you know that it was going to kind of work, or did you feel,
It's such a weird one because I think definitely there were times where it really, like right at the beginning, it was just so that I could be the right sort of mother for the kind of son I had. So that in the beginning, it was really just about me being able to deal with things because I felt so out of my depth. And then I think the more I worked with it, then I started feeling that I was on a journey with these medicines. And I mean, I still went through times where I remember even saying to my son that I'd worked it all out, the possibilities of you get killed, you kill somebody, you end up in prison, you know, all this stuff. And I remember saying to him, I think the one I can deal with the most is you being killed rather than you killing somebody. So I never, I think I just had to believe that at some point this seems to be so good, it can make some kind of a way through this situation. And I think I only started really believing that he would come to the medicines when he would discuss some of the papers I was sharing with him, and he would discuss some of the videos that he'd watched. So then I started thinking, okay, maybe he is becoming curious, because the weird thing is, for someone who was selling drugs, he was not taking drugs. And he had been smoking weed at the beginning, but I was able to get a urine sample and show him what was in his urine. And that made him to stop smoking with the people he was working with. So that was one good thing, was that he was still quite alert. But because the PTSD, that was more the worrying thing, was, is he ever going to be back to himself enough to make the decision to take anything? That was always my worry. But I think by then I'd also been so many years using, especially mushrooms, I just felt that if it's not going to work, they would have taken me on another journey.
Mm.
And instead, it just seemed to still be this kind of building up courage to take things forward. So then, yeah, there must have been a point where I was absolutely, I mean, I was convinced the more his PTSD got worse, the more I knew that they would work. Whether
Mm.
or not what would happen after they worked, I think, was definitely more of a surprise, the amount of work of undoing all the stuff he's been through. But that's taught me a lot now that I do work with more people coming out of cults or high demand situations. I'm able to explain to them much better that, yeah, the first medicine is amazing because it cuts that link, but then the rest of the relationship with yourself is something that takes a lot longer. And I have a client who I've managed to see through that whole journey. And it's really amazing. It's kind of 3 years to get to the point where absolutely the abuser is out of their head, out of their body. So, and that's even a surprise to me, how long it really takes when people are so manipulated to come back to themselves. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Mm. And also so hopeful that it can happen, because
Yes,
that, you know, the kind of the relevance today for all of us of the power of kind of cult-like thinking is
yes,
something that
yes,
it is something that we all are dealing with
yes.
in huge kind of numbers. Especially
Mm, mm,
uh, we have a lot of community members in the States, so this is something that is
mm.
particularly kind of frightening, I think, for people.
Yeah.
But just knowing that with the right kind of, when people really trust, with the
Mm,
right kind of
mm.
support, it is possible for someone to have
Yes.
come out of that. And the cult analogy is so helpful, I think, as well, because it's just
Mm,
so, it sometimes changes. I feel like it somehow changes. It almost feels like there's more hope, because sometimes when you just feel like
mm.
someone has been kind of, we understand what a cult is about. We've been
Yeah.
brainwashed. When someone is in a cult, they've
Mm,
been brainwashed. They don't meet, it's not their choice anymore. They're
mm, mm,
operating from
mm.
something that has taken them over.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that almost can bring some compassion. It's like it's
Yeah.
not a choice. And if you've
Mhm.
been brainwashed, you can be unbrainwashed, because it's not actually
Yes.
what you want. So that for
Yeah.
me feels really hopeful on a kind of big level.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, this work you're doing it gives me a lot of gratitude.
Oh, thank you.
And
Thank
tell
you.
us a bit
Thank
more
you.
about the work that you're doing now, Akua, because
Yeah.
the last time we spoke to you, the last time you came and did one of these talks for ASA, you talked about your story. But at that point, you were working in fashion. You were not
Mm.
yet working with your amazing clothes, but you were not yet a medicine facilitator. So tell us a little bit about and this journey and the journey to Ghana and finding the plants in Ghana.
Yeah, so it was, I think as soon as I started speaking about my son and my story and stuff, then I did start sitting for a few parents, and then just people who reached out to me because I suppose they felt that I could help them. And, you know, so that was really nice, but I was still mostly making clothes for people. And then in a medicine journey, kind of quite early on, I was shown that I would work with all the medicines if I wanted to, but I didn't feel to do anything about it. It was just, you know, all a little bit overwhelming in a way. So it was like, that was a really nice trip, and I really enjoyed telling everyone, but you know, I did nothing about it. And a few times I did think about ayahuasca, but it just seemed really daunting to go to South America to learn Spanish, to find a shaman, to find a community, and financially, you know, I just wasn't in a position to think about going somewhere to learn something for 6 months or a year. So I put it by, and I just worked with psilocybin magic mushrooms here, there, and everywhere. And then my mum, who had been ill, which was the reason why we came to the UK, she'd actually enjoyed quite a long period of reasonable health, just kind of her mobility was mostly what was not good. And then so 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer, but she'd been microdosing to help her with pain, but also I'd seen that she was showing very, very early signs of dementia, where her stories would go round and round and round, and she'd get little bits, little bursts of anger that were unrelated to anything. So yeah, we started her microdosing mushrooms, and luckily that just took like 2 months at the most, and that totally stopped. Her memory came back. So she'd been microdosing, and so when she was giving her cancer diagnosis, she just dealt with it in such a different way. She wasn't at all afraid of dying. She felt very, very ready. She said, I mean, literally within days, she was phoning everyone, told everyone to come and see her. And everyone did come and see her. There were endless barbecues and all of this stuff, with everyone organizing all this stuff. And although she was given 2 years, she actually only lasted 4 months. But in that 4 months, she saw everyone, she said everything. And it almost feels like she went faster because she was so ready to go in a way. So yeah, after she died, then we did the UK funeral, and we were going to do a Ghana funeral. And so I decided to spend longer in Ghana because I really wanted to organize a good funeral for her. And I'd found out that the iboga I'd taken right at the start of my journey had actually come from Ghana and not Gabon. So that was a huge kind of like, oh, I didn't even know we had iboga in Ghana, because when I'd been looking for it, absolutely no West African I knew even had heard of this medicine. So I decided that I would go to the farm to pay respects to the plant. I remember getting tobacco and, you know, Palo Santo and everything planned. And in all of those discussions, I found out that the farm also grew the capi vine and chacruna leaves needed to make ayahuasca. So I was very, very excited then. And when I went and I saw how it was grown, and I got to understand that, you know, you have to grow the capi vine in a forest because it needs different sizes of trees to go up. And even the chacruna leaves in Ghana, I think, mostly because everything grows so much, it's very normal to plant a lot of different things at the same time. So when you go into what is called a farm, it actually looks like a forest because there's so many different things growing. And I just felt really like, I can work with this plant now. I can see where it comes from. Met the people who grow it. I completely understand how it works. And I also got to understand how abundant it is. You know, you can start using ayahuasca within 3-4 years of starting to grow the capi vine. The chacruna leaves are so plentiful. So I think for me, from a sustainability point of view as well, I was really then calm. And so I was given my first capi vine and chacruna leaves, came back, boiled them up. Didn't boil them well the first time, but still had a little trip. And once I started using it on myself, it was like the training started. It was like the medicine had been waiting for me. It was very, very, very interesting. Yeah, so I when I finally learned how to boil it properly, yeah, I got to have it and it just welcomed me. And the training in a way just started. And I still, even to this day with ayahuasca, I haven't had I don't know, the purple elephants and ayahuasca appearing to me as whatever. It's still quite practical, the trips that I have on it, and it's still quite training, the trips that I have, and the messages are very clear. You know, they're not that cryptic. Whereas with mushrooms, I can still have trips where I've got to do some research. With ayahuasca, how it works on me is very, very, very practical, but not how it works on my clients. My clients are still, you know, all the ancestors are coming in and they're sitting around and all of this stuff. Whereas with me, it still feels like I'm really, really still in training. But it's just been the most awesome pleasure, because it feels like my mum also gave me this gift. You know, had I not come to Ghana to do her funeral, had she not died, the prospect of being able to make that change from fashion to psychedelics, it just, yeah, it just wouldn't have happened. And so she feels very, very ever present. The other ancestors feel a lot more present, and the medicine feels really present. And so, you know, the whole story feels like I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anybody, but at the same time, I can see how it's also been a kind of initiation and how to work with these medicines. And, you know, life is what it is, isn't it? What can you do?
And I think, yeah, well, it's so inspiring hearing queer, and also I think it's interesting that, you know, there are so many different kind of ways to train, because obviously, you know, that we have the kind of, most people do a training and there's different kind of official routes in, but from the very, very first time I heard your story, I thought, well, there's no better, yeah, there's no better kind of training than
Mm,
the the path that you have been on, and
mm,
the incredible transformation that it has is brought. So I think, yeah, this is a true woman of the medicine in your bones. You know, it's there's obviously a real gift there, and it's also come through such dedicated study. And yeah,
mm.
and like you say, it's so practical. You're it feels like you've been on a kind of, yeah, training course that's been devised by the medicines for you.
Yeah, totally aided though by everybody else's psychedelic books. I pretty much buy all the books that come out on Audible. So please, scientists, please
Yeah.
record your books, because
Yes.
that's where yeah, my Audible list is mostly about psychedelics.
And also, what amazing that we have mentioned as well that in Ghana, ayahuasca is legal, which is
Yes,
an amazing, which is so your practice there now, your facilitation work, your work with people, it's all out in the open, it's above board, and it's completely
totally.
legal. Yeah.
Totally, it's so much easier. And it was so funny. I was researching it for ages. I couldn't find anything. I wrote to the Department of Justice. I wrote to the police over here. Like, no one got back to me. And then before I traveled to Ghana, I did some ayahuasca, and I just got get a lawyer. And so then that's when I started thinking about, okay, let me look for lawyers. And then I found this amazing woman who works for this international drugs policy organization, and she heads the office in Ghana. So I
Mm.
wrote to her, and I realized that she was absolutely the best person placed to let me know. It took, and I did kind of hunt her down on all the different social medias, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, found her email, found another couple of emails, wrote to all of them. And then eventually she sent me a message back explaining that because of the unique mix of ayahuasca, although Ghana's a signatory to some international drugs thing from 1970, whatever, you have to ban ayahuasca as a brew. Even though everyone signed up to ban DMT, yeah, you have to ban ayahuasca as a brew, because I think it's something to do with this, not just by boiling two things, it's not enough of a process. Like with cocaine,
Uh,
it's there's so many more processes that it's in a way
mm,
not really affecting the coca plant when
mm,
you ban cocaine. So because Ghana has, I think it's 50-50 herbal medicine and allopathic medicine. And so because of that, it's I think she said cannabis had been banned when Ghana was still a British colony, but since Ghana stopped being a British colony, it would be very, very hard to ban a plant, especially two plants just being mixed together and boiled with water, um, because it would impact other medicines. So, yeah, and I think this probably is the case with most of Africa,
mm,
because a lot of African countries also have a really robust traditional herbal medicine culture. Um, but yeah, I've spoken to Nigerian herbalists, and they were saying that they know people who are serving medicine over there, but so far no one's really kind of
mm,
being super out there. So I've joined the Herbal Medical Association over here, and you have to say what medicine you serve. And I've registered ayahuasca as the medicine I serve. Yeah, so I can kind of put my little certificate up saying
yes.
that I serve ayahuasca legally, which is great.
L- Love it. Love your whole approach. I love everything about it. And so if people are interested in finding more, you have retreats that you offer in
Yes,
Ghana with ayahuasca.
yes,
So if
yes.
anyone has been listening to this thinking, I want to meet this woman like the apps, everything, um, then they can, because they can come to
Yes.
one of your retreats. So we'll put information about that out with this chat, and you're going to be with the ACE community next week for a Q&A, a live
Yes.
Q&A, so people can ask you all their questions, and we'll have you back
Yes.
for more conversation. Queer, in the month of gratitude, just thank you. It's been a joy to hear you.
Thank you too. And I'm so pleased that this is a month of gratitude, because I literally am in the home of gratitude at the moment. This is my best friend's house, and her whole thing is about gratitude. And I was just out in her new garden center, which is Gratitude Gardens. And we have a little Airbnb together across the road from here called Gratitude Inn. So this is so aligned. This is so aligned.
And you
So
have a
I'm in complete gratitude for counting you as a friend. I'm just so happy. Thank you so much.
Me too, and very grateful for your friendship too. And I loved
Mm.
how, as well, you showed me on the wall there was a great big wooden sign saying gratitude on the wall in the house you're in. So yes, gratitude is definitely strongly with us. So in this crazy world with all of the heavinesses that people are dealing with at the moment, and the anxieties and the worries, there is, yeah, this has been a moment of real hope for me, hope for the world. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Yeah. See you
Thank you.
soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod. Bye bye, my love. Mwah.
Bye. Mwah.